Hey everyone, how's it going? Thanks so much for tuning in. Today I'm proud to present the final in-depth review of my manual swapped, tuned port fuel injected 85 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS. Before we get started, I'd like to extend a huge thanks to all of the brands that supported this build, including O'Reilly Auto Parts, Original Parts Group, Second Skin Automotive Insulation, Jet Hot, Holley Performance Products, Alden American, Pro Touring Products, Falcon Tire, and Dakota Digital. As with all of my reviews, I'm going to cover all of the ins and outs and take this thing on a thorough drive. There's a whole lot of stuff to cover, so without further ado, let's go ahead and start her up and let her run. The G-body platform Monte Carlo SS was produced between 1983 and 1988. Over the 5-year span, it underwent several notable changes, with some of the most impactful being in 1985. The overall look of the SS was far more aggressive compared to your standard Monte Carlo, being completely devoid of chrome trim, wheel moldings, and body side moldings. The most notable difference is the aerodynamic front fascia and lower air dam, as well as the lower fender extensions. This was complemented by a full-width trunk spoiler and body color sport mirrors. The grille and headlamp buckets were blacked out, as were the window, cowl trim, belt, and trunk moldings, taillights, drip rails, door handles, and exterior locks. To really set it apart, the SS was also offered with stripe packages to complement the special door and trunk decals. For 83 and 84 models, the only exterior colors were blue or white. The interior was only offered in one two-tone blue and white theme. In 84, Chevrolet added the option of front bucket seats and introduced a sportier SS-specific steering wheel. While performance numbers for the SS high-output 5-liter V8 aren't much to look at this day and age, they were respectable for their time. The 83 models were the least powerful at 175 horsepower. However, that was 25 horsepower more than the standard Monte's optional 5-liter V8 and quite a bump over the standard V6. In 84, horsepower for the SS increased to 180, where it would remain through the rest of the car's production. This car wasn't all about power though. It also featured a number of suspension revisions to make it handle with greater limits that a standard Monte Carlo could only dream of. The biggest news for 85 was the newly standard TH200R4 4-speed automatic overdrive transmission, which replaced the previously used TH350 3-speed automatic. Also new was a more aggressive 3.73 ratio for the 7 5/8 inch rear end versus the previously used 3.42 ratio. A limited slip differential was optional. More interior and exterior colors became available, as well as stripe and decal packages. The color of the stripes would have been red or orange for 85, depending on the exterior color. There were 4 options: white, silver metallic, black, and dark maroon metallic. This car has had its original color repainted before, but it's far from perfect. A properly prepped new paint job along with adding the stripe kit would really take this thing over the top. T-tops were also offered for the first time on the SS in '85. Similar in design to the 3rd Gen F-body cars, they offered an awesome open-air experience, but unfortunately were kinda problematic. For '86, there were some small changes, such as new, more aerodynamic side view mirrors, new 15-inch alloy wheels, and the addition of a 3rd brake light. In '87, the SS adopted a smoother, more rounded rear end and a lower profile spoiler. The interior received some freshening as well. There were no significant changes for 1988. Of course, you can't forget the uniqueness of the limited production Aero Coupe, which only existed as a NASCAR homologation model. It had a high expanse of fastback style rear glass with the end goal of improving how air moves over the car. The trunk lid, parcel shelf, and rear glass were all unique and admittedly a bit polarizing. The starting price for a Monte Carlo SS in '85 was around $11,608. Additional options originally equipped on this car included intermittent windshield wipers, an electric rear window defogger, air conditioning, front bucket seats with a center console, a tilt steering wheel, twin remote sport mirrors, auxiliary lighting, power windows, and cruise control. The total MSRP with destination would have probably been around $14,041. Aside from the wheels, which I'll talk about next, and the tuned port injection badge on the trunk lid, I didn't change anything with the exterior, just detailed and touched it up the best I could. The '85 Monte Carlos were offered with several different wheel options, including steel wheels with wire wheel covers and alloy wheels. The SS had its own unique set of 15 by 7-inch rally wheels. They were steel wheels that were painted silver and black and finished off with center caps and stainless beauty rings. The wheels shown here are 17 by 8-inch replicas of the N90 alloy wheels that were offered on '86 through '88 models. I've always preferred the look of the N90s versus the earlier rally wheels. I ordered this as a set from year 1, which came with repop center caps and lug nuts. It's a modern setup that still retains an OE look, the perfect Restomod touch. The wheels are wrapped in 245/45 Falcon ZX all-season tires, which deliver excellent grip overall and a quiet ride. As far as the brakes, the SS was originally fitted with internally ventilated 10.5-inch disc brakes in the front with single piston calipers and drum brakes in the rear. The mechanical parking brake is foot activated by a lever underneath the left side of the dash. For how I was wanting this car at the end of the day, the stock brakes provided plenty of stopping power. I did end up adding drilled and slotted front discs for better cooling, but other than that, everything is as it was originally. Of course, I ended up replacing everything, including the wheel bearings, wheel cylinders, drum components, seals, and brake lines. Originally, the front suspension was an independent design with upper and lower control arms, coil springs, and gas-charged shock absorbers. The rear suspension is a multi-link setup with coil springs and gas-charged shock absorbers. The standard F41 Sport suspension on the SS included heavy-duty front and rear shocks, higher-rated front and rear springs, stiffer rear suspension bushings, a stiffer front anti-sway bar, and the addition of a rear sway bar. Even though the SS suspension was tuned to deliver far greater handling than a standard Monte Carlo, I knew it had a lot more room to go. I wanted to lower the car, but I wanted to do it properly and actually improve how it rode and handled. During the process of rebuilding the entire front end, I installed drop spindles and ended up ditching the factory springs and shocks in favor of 4-corner adjustable coilovers from Alden American. Not only do they allow for ride height adjustment, but you can adjust the valving to control damper firmness. For being a larger car, this thing handles on rails compared to how it was originally. In stock form, the car is perfectly capable, but I wanted to get even more out of it. It now corners surprisingly flat and feels more predictable with dramatically reduced body roll. The only thing missing is the limited slip differential. I have the firmness set to the middle setting, which keeps the ride quality taut without being overly jarring. That being said, it's easy enough to adjust the damping by turning a small dial in the shock absorber housing. With an overall ratio of 12.7 to 1, the steering gearbox used on the SS was far quicker than a regular Monte Carlo. It takes about 2.75 turns to go from lock to lock. Another thing that really improved the car's overall feel was replacing the original steering shaft with one from Hooker Blackhart that attaches with double U-joints. Technically, it's sold as a replacement shaft for LS swapping a first generation S10, but I didn't have any issues with installing it on this car. The rag joint on the original steering shaft, which is like a rubber insulator for dampening vibrations, is a common source for steering sloppiness and general vagueness. With that gone, the steering is much more direct and responsive. It has a great feel to it. The steering pump and fluid reservoir is a newer style, therefore I ended up making custom pressure and return lines. I also added a fluid cooler while I was in there. The steering wheel was unique to the SS and featured a special badge in the middle, a sportier design, a softer feel, and faux stitching. The Monte Carlo SS was powered by a 5-liter high-output V8, which sent power to the rear wheels through a standard 4-speed automatic transmission and standard 3.73 gearing. The engine was built using cast iron for the block and heads, while the intake manifold was cast aluminum. It's an overhead valve pushrod motor with 2 valves per cylinder and hydraulic lifters. Fuel was originally delivered through an engine-driven mechanical fuel pump to an electronically controlled 4-barrel Rochester Quadrajet carburetor. The compression ratio was 9.5 to 1 with electronic spark control. A low-restriction dual exhaust system was also standard, with a unique tailpipe design that exited at the rear of the car. In its original configuration, the SS would have made 180 horsepower at 4,800 RPM and 235 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 RPM. Good for a 0 to 60 time of 8.4 seconds and a quarter-mile time of 16.1 seconds. While a respectable performance for its day, I've always felt these cars could have been so much more, especially when considering the fuel injection and turbocharging technologies that were available at the time. That being said, my primary goal with building this car was to give it the added dose of pizzazz that I felt it so desperately needed, using some period-correct technology. The end results are a lot more showy than a factory-built car would have been, but nonetheless, I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. It's old school with a modern twist. The car is still powered by a 5-liter V8, but that's where the similarities to its original configuration end. The custom tuned port fuel injection system that I added was originally fitted to a late 3rd-gen Camaro. I completely stripped down and rebuilt the system as simply as possible. I also had a custom ECM and chip burn to run the system at its peak potential with as little hindrance as possible. The wiring was done by a good friend of mine. It's a custom standalone harness. The ECM is mounted in the factory spot inside the car. Everything you see is new, including the engine, injectors, distributors, and sensors. The throttle body has been upgraded too, which, thanks to its larger ports, draws in a greater amount of air from the custom cold air intake. I positioned the latter as far away as possible so that it mostly takes in air from behind the driver's side headlight area. The intake piping also integrates the mass airflow and intake air temperature sensors. Other upgrades include polished aluminum valve covers and breathers, an oversized 2-row aluminum radiator from Cold Case, and dual 12-inch electric fans, as well as spark plug wire organizers, a billet aftermarket accessory drive system, and custom core support block-off plates. The latter supposedly helps with cooling, but I love how they clean things up. While the engine and everything was out, I also deep cleaned and repainted the entire bay satin black. The dual exhaust system is from Hooker Blackhart, available through Holly. The long tube headers I had ceramic coated by Jet Hot. It's their classic polish finish, which matches all of the engine's shiny bits. The headers feature 1 5/8 inch primaries, 3-inch collectors, and are designed to work with Hooker's LS Swap True dual exhaust system, which are available in either 2.5 inch diameter or 3-inch diameter depending on your engine and power levels. If you're running a high-powered Gen 1 small block, you can also get these headers with 1 3/4 inch primaries. For my setup, the smaller primaries with the 2.5 inch exhaust system was perfect. I also opted for the 2.5 inch tailpipe kit that mimics the car's original look. The car sounds awesome and drone is non-existent. I'm very happy with it overall. There's an X-pipe built in and dual mufflers just ahead of the rear axle. I replaced the original fuel tank and sending unit with a Holley Sniper EFI fuel tank system, which includes the proper sending unit, fuel pump, a new 17-gallon tank, and new tank straps. I was able to reuse the majority of the factory fuel lines that run underneath the car before converting them to stainless braided AN lines. I modified the TPI fuel rails to accept AN fittings, which really cleaned things up as the fuel lines run down the back of the motor. Originally, the TPI fuel inlet and return lines were at the front. I never calculated fuel economy numbers since building this car, but EPA estimates range between 15 miles per gallon in the city and 22 miles per gallon on the highway. Typical averages are around 17 miles per gallon. I have everything currently tuned on 93 octane premium fuel. Now for what I believe is the best part about this car. After having issues with the original automatic transmission, I ended up ditching it in favor of a world-class T5 that I also pulled from a late 3rd gen Camaro. These cars were never offered with the option of a manual transmission, so I couldn't resist the idea of such a unique upgrade. Plus, it's a perfect match for the car. It's just the right amount of power with a negligible difference in curb weight between a Monte Carlo and a Camaro, and the transmission is the perfect overall length to locate the shifter in just the right spot. The transmission was already in excellent shape. I just cleaned it up, replaced the tail shaft seal, added new fluid, and installed a new flywheel and clutch kit. I also had to get my drive shaft shortened, wire up the reverse lights, and slightly notch the slave cylinder mounting bracket for header clearance. Even though the headers are coated, I wrapped the bottom of the driver's side out of precaution so the slave cylinder wouldn't heat soak. All in all, it was a very straightforward install and has performed wonderfully. I was even able to use my Hooker Blackheart automatic transmission crossmember, which is a recommended part when installing the dual exhaust system. It just had to be relocated forward some. Thankfully, this car was a factory floor shift car, so I was able to modify the top plate of the center console and have the shifter come right through. I did have to heat the shifter rod and bend it slightly to the right. The transmission naturally sits tilted to the left a bit, so it was necessary not to hit the center console when shifting between first and second gear. The pedal kit and hydraulics was a whole package I ordered from Pro Touring Products. You have to modify the original pedal assembly, drill a hole in the firewall, and figure out where to mount the fluid reservoir. Other than that, it's a complete bolt-on setup. The way this car feels now is night and day compared to how it was when I first got it. Of course, the transmission makes everything so much more engaging, but between having multi-port fuel injection, excellent throttle response, and all of the supporting mods, this thing is downright fun and has a healthy increase in power. It's exactly what I was hoping it would be. Monte Carlo was referred to as a personal luxury coupe, and the interior definitely reflected that. It's a fairly large interior that can actually sit folks in the rear with relative ease. It was also available with a plethora of options, including power and convenience accessories, several radios, seating configurations, instrument clusters, and more. In other words, you can really personalize these cars quite a bit. The SS carried a similar list of optional extras as the standard car, but offered some unique things too, such as the sporty steering wheel, special upholstery trimming, and a full gauge package of standard equipment that included a trip odometer, tachometer, and a quartz clock. Without a doubt, the fanciest bit of tech in this car is the Dakota Digital RTX instrument cluster. I love their products, I've used them in the past, and it was a perfect fit for the Monte Carlo. While they offer different styles of instrument clusters to suit different budgets, the RTX is the top of the line. It's designed to mimic the style of the original cluster, so again, perfectly fitting with that Restomod build. It's also completely customizable, from the colors of the backlighting to the needles and more. You've got performance data that you can track from 0 to 60 to, quarter mile acceleration and so on and so forth. It is a really cool setup. The overall build quality is typical 1980s GM. Certainly nothing to write home about, but it has its nice touches. I especially like the padded upper door panels and how they feature large pull handles and subtle chrome trim. One of the biggest issues, which isn't Monte Carlo specific, is the dash pad, which is prone to cracking. You can order new dashes, but they're on major back orders. You can also get them restored, but it's quite a lot of money. I ended up fitting a color-matched dash cap to this one and reattached the carpeted cover that came with the car when I first bought it. It looks pretty decent overall, to be honest. The manually adjusting bucket seats were an optional feature, which also required you to pony up for a full-length center console and floor shifter. By far, it's the sportiest looking setup that matches the car a lot better than the standard bench seat or the optional 45-55 split bench seat. The bench seats were also paired to a column shifter. It's wild to think that you can technically sit up to 6 people in these cars. Definitely doable depending on the size of the people. In 85, you had the option of gray or maroon upholstery, a combination of soft cloth and vinyl, and accent piping. The bucket seats are pretty basic in structure and offer decent comfort. Adjustments are limited to sliding back and forth and reclining. A tilt steering column was optional for extra comfort. I'm 5 foot 10 inches and I feel there's pretty decent space overall. The biggest hindrance is going to be headspace for people over 6 feet. The upholstery in this car is all original, including the seats, door panels, and rear side panels. Everything else has been replaced or restored. I gutted everything out of this car except for the dash and restored it completely. Along with replacing a couple sections of the floor pan, I treated everything, cleaned it all thoroughly, and applied tons of sound and heat insulation from Second Skin Automotive Insulation throughout the entire car, including the trunk. I've replaced anything that was broken. There's a new headliner and dome light, some new trim panels, a new windshield, all new chrome trim, new door handles, new coat hooks, and a new center console lid. I even repainted all of the interior plastics to freshen things up. Everything works as it should and it all feels like new, only better. I went through the doors and installed new anti-rattle kits, adjusted the glass accordingly, replaced the window motors, and lubed up the regulators. Of course, I also replaced all of the door and front window weather stripping. The air conditioning system on this car works great, especially with all of the extra insulation. The vent underneath the steering column is especially nice. The system is operated by 3 slide levers above the radio, which is backlit at night for easy viewing. Part of my restoration work involved the removal and complete rebuilding of the AC and heater box. It's a huge unit that spans from under the dash to out in the engine bay and includes the blower motor, blend doors, evaporator, and more. As these cars age, the gaskets and seals inside deteriorate, so the force of air that comes out of the vents ends up dropping significantly. Plus, if not sealed correctly, the portion in the engine bay where it meets up with the firewall can become a problematic leak point. It's a pain in the butt to do, but with everything restored back to like new, the air blows hard and the different zones cycle just as they should. Along with replacing all of the other AC components, I ended up adding a condenser from a Regal, which put the lines at the passenger side, used a hard line from a 3rd gen Camaro, and modified the original AC lines to accept aftermarket fittings so they would work with the new sanding compressor. The original AM/FM radio was not with the car when I first bought it, so I elected to put together a complete custom audio system of my own. Starting with a really nice single DIN radio, I ran all new wiring to higher quality factory replacement speakers. The dual 12-inch subwoofers and box I actually had reserved for another project that I ended up not using, so I decided to throw a little trunk bass in there. I also mounted the amplifiers for the interior speakers and subs between the box and rear seat so everything is hidden for cleanliness. The system sounds awesome. A cool thing about these cars is the aftermarket audio support. You can actually install custom rear decks, lower door panels, and kick panels to add significantly more speakers throughout if you're really wanting to jam. Being an older car, you don't have near as much storage space like what you would see in a modern car. You don't have any cup holders either. There's a cool compartment at the front of the center console which would normally house the ashtray, but I use it to store a USB cable for connecting devices to the radio. There's a flip-up lid at the back of the console that offers a good amount of space. The glove box is also lockable. Additional front area amenities include a manually dimming rearview mirror, dual padded visors, overhead roof lighting, and a lighter next to the climate controls. Additional convenience extras shown here include dual remote side view mirrors, a rear window defroster, and power windows. Power locks were optional, as was a power trunk opener. The rear view mirror I installed was actually a custom touch I decided to do. It has map lights built in, which to my knowledge was something that was never offered on these cars. I had to drill a hole in the front headliner retaining strip and wire it into the dome light circuit so the lights not only come on when opening the door, but they can be turned on when the door is closed as needed, just like a factory setup would have been. The Monte Carlo offered a pretty generous trunk. Normally you would just open it up with a key, but as I mentioned, a powered trunk release was optional. This car wasn't equipped with it. Part of the additional auxiliary lighting included a trunk light that mounted to the lid so you can see easier at night. Total cargo capacity is 16.2 cubic feet. It's a wide, flat floor with a raised forward section that has now been taken up by the subwoofer box and amplifiers. There's still a large amount of space available though. On the right side is where the original spare tire sits, along with the tire changing equipment. It sits within its own well that's molded into the trunk pan. A cardboard cover helps guard against small items falling into the well. In some of these angles you can see some of the Damplifier Pro deadening material that I used from Second Skin. Not only does it cover the entire trunk pan underneath the carpet, but the sides, rear wheel arches, and the tail panel. If you wanted to fancy things up even more, some aftermarket companies also offer complete custom carpet kits for the trunk with closeout panels that make the area look a lot nicer and more modern. Well everyone, that's going to wrap it up for this video and the series. From the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much for your support and keeping up with this build. This car turned out so cool. Now, it's time to move on to the next one. If you haven't already, definitely subscribe and make sure your notifications are turned on because, of course, there's always a lot more content where that came from. And if you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to leave a like down below because it really helps the videos a lot. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.